Good evening. Good evening, everyone. I'm Harold Holzer, and I have the privilege of serving as director of the Roosevelt House, and on behalf of Jennifer Rabb, the president of Hunter College, I want to welcome you and welcome our special guests tonight. It's a little intimidating looking out and seeing Judge DeMango here because I keep thinking she's going to say, we're going to retire to deliberate. I'm worried about how I'm going to fare if she does that. We only just, you're right. Oh, good, I prevail, yay. So those of you who watch the judges, and I think Judge Acker will be joining us too, know exactly what I'm referring to. I try not to feel like a litigant. I will feel like a host. I'm very proud and happy to welcome them to a house where justice for all has been a living and breathing way of life since Franklin D. and Eleanor Roosevelt moved here back in 1908. It's also a pleasure to have you here because, as I told Judge Corriero, I'm a fan and admirer. Not only because you're performing on television, but because you bring a record of advocacy for the application of equal justice under the law. And you teach people what the law can do, its elasticity, and it's the opportunities it gives people. And Judge DeMango is a veteran criminal court judge from Brooklyn, the Supreme Court Justice. Judge Acker, who you will meet later, is a Yale Law School grad who served as a White House counsel and worked in the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. Tonight we're going to turn the spotlight on the male member of this triumvirate, and it's a great privilege to welcome him here because Judge Michael Corriero has been focusing on youth criminal justice for a long time and very inspiringly. And also, I found out upstairs that he and I have a mutual friend, very dear friend, who was my boss when I worked for Mario Cuomo, and his friend as a teenager. And we all came out okay, which is amazing because I know my friend. One sidelight note is that Franklin Roosevelt actually, well, most of you have heard this spiel before, but for those who haven't, FDR's mother built this house as a wedding present and Christmas present for them began it in 1905. The younger generation and two of their children moved in 1908. The house came with a condition, of course, and that is that the mother-in-law was going to live in the next house. And when she got here, she took a look at the walls separating the dining room, which you will all see when we have our reception, and said, these dining rooms are much too small for people of our position, so let's open them up. And while we're at it, let's open up the second floor and the third floor. And as Eleanor later wrote, my mother-in-law was on my side of the house for the next 25 years, sometimes at the least expected moments, whatever that means. But FDR was, when he recovered from polio here, by the way, not in Hyde Park, because this house had elevators, and Eleanor convinced him that he would enjoy more access to the world if he recovered here. He went to work in a law firm. I'm saying that for the judge's benefit. He didn't like it. He also fell on his way to work one day in the lobby and was so upset and embarrassed that he didn't want to go back to the law firm. So his embarrassment and his lack of interest is the public domain's good because he went into politics again after that. His desk is here, which was one of our treasured relics, his law school desk. This house is also devoted to Eleanor, whose opinions appeared for 28 years in a column called My Day. Even I can remember the late days of My Day in the 60s. And she had some interesting things to say about criminal justice and about youth justice. Over the years, she talked about almost every major issue before the people of New York and the country. Some people commit crimes, she said, in a moment of passion when there is no reflection as to the result that will ensue. In other cases, it is almost always fear which brings about crime, and when there is fear, there is no thought of possible consequence, and it would be well for us to keep that in mind. Punishment, she believed, ultimate punishment particularly, should be left to the author of life, who gives and takes life, by which she meant higher power. No human being, she argued, had the right to take away life in the name of justice. So she was against capital punishment in the early days. This is 1958, early in that argument, but late in her days of writing the column. So our Eleanor was not afraid to get into controversial issues, of course. Where youth justice was concerned, and yes, there is an entry about that too, her goal was what she called the hope for rehabilitation, not harsh punishment, not undue punishment from which there was no return. She was for improving conditions to prevent the recurrence of the situations which brought the young offenders into court, by which she meant family problems, lack of opportunity, and lack of caseworkers, interestingly. Problems that required, she said, more than personal and incidental work by good-hearted individuals. So it's a nice thing to remember as we talk about that subject today. Before I introduce our speakers, a reminder, we hope you will all turn your cell phones off. Otherwise, Judge Domingo will have at you. I tell our guests that I would love to get through one event in 4 years that we don't have a cell phone ring. Maybe this will be the night. We will have a reception following, at which you're all invited upstairs for a glass of wine and to meet our speakers. We are delighted tonight to welcome Judge Michael Corriero, author of Judging Children as Children, a proposal for a juvenile justice system. For 16 years, he sat on the bench here in New York as chief of Manhattan's Youth Part, a special court he created within the state Supreme Court to focus on young adults prosecuted as adults under the state's juvenile offender laws. The Youth Part became, under his leadership, a model for coordinating treatment and social services for children prosecuted in adult courts. He was also the founder of the Families Rising Project under the New York Foundling. He headed Big Brothers and Big Sisters of New York, and he held appointments from Governor Patterson, Mayor Bloomberg, Governor Cuomo, and our wonderful late Chief Judge Judy Kaye to both state and city panels focused on juvenile justice. He was also the chair of the Committee on Juvenile Justice for the New York City Bar Association. And among his many honors is one I saw in his biography that I think is worth mentioning. He earned it from the Citizens Committee for Children in 2011, and it was the Eleanor Roosevelt Award, so that's worth mentioning tonight. Which is not to say that for all his efforts we have quite figured out how to deal with this issue, which is why we're so glad to have him. The website, The City, just posted yesterday that a state legislative fix designed to spare 16 and 17-year-olds charged with a felony from adult court on weekends or after hours has impacted exactly 0 people in Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Staten Island since it was passed. So they've done a little investigative piece, and we'll wait to hear whether these reforms can actually come into being. So the judge has the perfect interlocutor tonight, Dr. Carla Barrett, academic director of the Prison to College Pipeline Program, which she runs from our sister fellow institution at John Jay, is the author of Courting Kids, Inside an Experimental Youth Court, which I learned only this evening was Judge Corriero's court. So this is going to be an engaging discussion among people who know their work and know each other's work. She is an expert in her own right on alternatives to incarceration. Judge Corriero will have, and Dr. Barrett will have a conversation, following which they will take your questions. So please welcome to Roosevelt House, Dr. Carla Barrett in conversation with Judge Michael Corriero.
Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for that lovely introduction. I guess someone asked me tonight how long I've known Judge Corriero, and the answer, I think it was 1999 or 2000. I was taken by some professor to visit this court. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't understand anything that happened that day. But I left the youth part. Was it 70 or 77? Part 70.
Part 73.
Part 73, excuse me. I left that day knowing that.
Good number.
Yeah, I left knowing that there was a story there that needed to be told, and I knew I had to come back because I knew something really unique and interesting was happening. It ended up being that I spent 2.5 years observing that court, and it was my dissertation research that led to my book. So when I make the joke, I showed up in court and then I just never left. It's an honor to be here again. It's been a while since we've seen each other, and to be able to talk about juvenile justice issues. For anyone that doesn't know, this is a profoundly historic moment for New York State. As of October 1st, we now no longer try all 16 and 17-year-olds as if they were adults. Up until the Raise the Age legislation passed, we were one of only 2 states in the union, us and North Carolina, that still did that. So in many ways, we were sort of behind the curve. In a lot of ways, New York has always been on the forefront of juvenile justice reform. My first question to you is, can you put this historical moment with the Raise the Age legislation and what it means sort of into the historical context of juvenile justice in New York State? Because there's been a lot of change over the last 100 to 150 years.
Yes, I think we are at an incredible point in time in terms of how we view, treat, and judge children who slip outside the law. And the Raise the Age legislation was just a dramatic reorientation of how we were going to treat young people under 18 years of age. But before I do that, I need to say that I'm really honored that Carla is here and agreed to do this. And I've already told her that she has to rein me in, because if she just asks me a question, I can talk for an hour. So, and I may very well do that. No, but this is also a very auspicious evening, because my very first law partner, who has known all of my picadillos and my idiosyncrasies, is here tonight with his lovely wife, Mark Herman. And he was and is an incredible lawyer, and I'm extremely pleased that you're here, Mark. So I hope I do you well. I hope I do you well. So let me tell before I begin, let me say that what I miss, I was on the bench for 28 years. The last 16 years, I had the responsibility of resolving the cases of all the 13, 14, and 15-year-old children who were being automatically tried as adults pursuant to New York's juvenile offender law, a law which still exists, as Carla so pointed out to me upstairs. A law that still exists and hasn't been changed by the Raise the Age legislation. And for 16 years, I resolved the cases of essentially thousands of adolescents. And I tried to develop a process, a methodology where I could interact with every one of them, so that I could try to develop a rapport that permitted me to act as a catalyst for change in their lives. And that was a difficult thing to do for a judge, because we are separated, just as we're separated here from this audience, this space, if you will. So I missed that interaction. So when I see Mark here, he reminds me of another lawyer that knew me for over 40 years, Howard Jaffe. And his story, and the story illustrates for me what it was that really made the youth part such an exciting experience. So one day, Howie came into my office, to my courtroom, and he was representing this young boy. And Howie and I tried our very first jury trial against each other. He as a young legal aid lawyer, and I as a young prosecutor. And we tried this case. It was a jury trial. It was hard fought. And every time he comes into the courtroom, he has this unusual expression on his face, but I seem to have that same kind of expression, because we both remember winning that trial. And neither of us, it's the truth, neither of us have had the courage to look back and say, you know, whose memory is worse on this occasion. But nevertheless, Howard comes in, and he's representing this young boy, and he's trying to impress me, Howard. He says, you know, Judge, my client is reading, and he knows that I think reading is very important. It opens so many doors and gives young people so many opportunities to see different worlds and to get out of themselves. I said, well, that's terrific. He's reading. I said, what is he reading? He's reading Dickens. Oh, Howard, you know I love Dickens. He's my favorite. Yes. So I turned to this young man. I said, young man, what are you reading? He said, I'm reading A Tale of Two Cities. I said, oh, that's terrific. I said, what did you think of? It was the best of times and it was the worst of times. And he looked at me quizzically. I said, it's in the book. He said, I didn't get that far. So I can see there are many literature majors. It's probably the most famous opening line. I didn't hold it against them. I held it against Howie. So, but nevertheless, the book is an important book because it's a book about second chances. It's a book about redemption. And that's what we were about. That's what we were about. So I left the bench in 2008. And what brought me to this field of advocacy and wanting to change the laws under which we operated, because as Carla pointed out, New York was only one of 2 states in the entire nation that prosecuted children as young as 16 automatically as adults in the adult court. So if a 16-year-old boy went into a grocery store and stole a piece of candy, he wasn't going to the juvenile court or the family court, he was going to the adult court. And so the consequences of being tried as an adult were life-altering for many of these young people. And not only were 16-year-olds coming into my courtroom, but 13, 14, and 15-year-olds who were accused pursuant to the juvenile offender law, which was considered to be the most draconian legislation involving young people in the entire nation. And so I had to decide which of these 13, 14, 15-year-olds, and many of their co-defendants, 16 and 17-year-olds, had to go to jail, who got a second chance. And it was an awesome responsibility. My friend Harold in the back just sent Mary Ellen a text message about the meaning of Yom Kippur, actually. And she read it to me. Mary Ellen Rafter is my wife. She's not taking my last name, but that's because she's an independent woman, and we'll excuse her for that. But it was standing in awe of this tremendous responsibility that was placed on my shoulders. And I tried to develop a way to help me deal in a way that was developmentally sensitive to these issues. So I'm getting to your answer, Carla.
I believe you.
Come here.
I do believe you.
So I leave the bench in 2008, and I become the executive director of Big Brothers Big Sisters. And one day, I think it was November of 2009, I get an email from a young man by the name of King Hong Woo. And the email says, Judge Corriero, I don't know if you remember me, but in 1996, when I was 14 years of age, I appeared in your courtroom. And you sentenced me for 5 robberies that I had at the time. But you told me that if I did everything you said I should do, that you would stand behind me. And stand behind me was in quotes. And I didn't remember this boy. I didn't. So I reached out to my law clerk at the time, Allison, who's now a judge herself. And I said, Allison, I said, do you remember the case of King Hong Woo? She says, no. She says, but I'll get you the transcript. And she got me the transcript, and I read the transcript and refreshed my recollection. So I remember this young boy. I remember coming out of the courtroom on this particular day, and the court clerk came out, Judge, we need a Chinese interpreter. The defendant's mother was in the audience, and she didn't speak English, and we needed an interpreter for her, and there were other members of her family. So now I realize what the case was about. This young boy, he was 14 years of age, he was in my courtroom, he had 5 pending robberies, and while he was out on bail on one of the robberies, he committed another. So the district attorney now is in my courtroom and say, Judge, you can't give this kid a second chance. Well, obviously, he demonstrated that he didn't really appreciate and understand what it was to be arrested in the first place. And the story was that, yes, while out on bail, he committed another robbery. His legal aid lawyer came up to me and said, Judge, he said, I've got a pre-pleading investigation. I want you to take a look at it. And I'm reading it. And it tells me that this young boy, up until about a year before he got into trouble, was an excellent student in school. He was doing very well. All of his teachers thought very highly of him. But he was being picked on by other kids in the school. And so he joined a group, a rival group, if you will, in order to get protection. And this group went out into Chinatown in the evenings, and they committed these 5 robberies. And they were relatively serious. No one was significantly injured, but one of the boys had a knife. Another boy was a little bit more physical. He put people in chokeholds, and another boy punched them. But he was acting in concert with them, and the evidence was overwhelming of his guilt on these 5 robberies. So the district attorney says, I want 5 to 10 years, Judge, because you know under the jail law, you can get consecutive sentences as much as 5 to 10. And the defense lawyer said, wait a minute, Judge, he's never been in trouble before. Look at this probation report. He's doing well in school. He's doing, he's got great potential. But I couldn't get to a second chance for him because a decision to give him a second chance would have meant that I would have had to give him probation or some lesser sentence. And I just couldn't get there because of the fact that while he was out on bail, he committed another crime. And so we compromised, and we settled on a 3 to 9 sentence, which was significant. It wasn't lenient. So I wanted to tell his mother, who was in the audience, that my hands were tied. So I couldn't find, finding a Chinese interpreter, you might as well go to China. So we were waiting and waiting and waiting, and I see this woman in the audience, and she's crying, she's in tears, and our son is in front of me, and he's in handcuffs now. And we're talking about his faith, and I wanted to make sure that she understood what was happening to her son. So I said, there was another little girl there. I said, it was his sister. I said, you speak English? She said, yes, Judge, I do. I said, let me speak to your mother. I want to try to tell your mother what we can do, what was happening. And she got up, the mother, and she said, Judge, to her daughter, she said, I'm a seamstress. Sorry. She said, I'm a seamstress, and I work 12 hours a day. My mother was a seamstress. I'm a little emotional. Patricia. So I said, I'm sorry that I have to do this with respect to your son. She said, Judge, my mother wants you to understand that she came here with King when he was 5 years of age, and his father is not with us, that she's worked 12 hours a day, and she couldn't give King the kind of attention that he needed. And she said, it was her fault that he got into trouble. And when she said it was her fault, I looked at him and I said, no, I said, it's not your mother's fault, it's your fault. What are you going to do for your mother? He said, you're going to be serving 3 to 9 years. What are you going to do for your mother? He said, Judge, I'm going to make it up to my mother. I said, you're going to make it up to your mother? I said, well, this is what you're going to do. You're going to educate yourself while you're there. You're going to get your high school diploma. You're going to get a college diploma. When you get out, you're going to get a job, and you're going to take care of your family. And if you do that, I'll stand behind you. And there it was in the transcript. I said it. I'll stand behind you. So the next paragraph of the email, to give my emotional reactions, Mary Ellen, sometimes my wife says, you sound angry. I said, I'm not angry, I'm Italian. And all of these things, they erupt in me. So the next paragraph of the email, he says, Judge, I did everything you said. I was such a good resident in the facility, I got out at the minimum of 3 years. I got my high school diploma. I got my college diploma. I went out. I got my first job with the PBA as a data entry specialist, the Police Benevolent Association. I did so well. I got another job at a real estate firm, and I've risen to become vice president of IT for the entire firm. Last year, my mother decided to become a citizen because they gave the test in her language. They had changed it. And she went down and she became an American citizen. So I thought, you're laughing, right? I thought it was a good idea that I go down to become a citizen for my mother's sake. And so I said, I went down to immigration, and they told me what I did. What did you do for a living? Well, I'm the vice president of internet, so on and so forth. And where do you live? And I told him, and he said, by the way, have you ever been in trouble? He said, yeah, I was in trouble when I was 14 years of age. So come back in 2 weeks. Judge, I came back in 2 weeks. They put me in handcuffs. They've taken me to New Jersey. I'm being held without bail, and I'm awaiting mandatory deportation to China. Judge, I thought you said that if I did everything, that you'd stand behind me. I thought you said I did everything you expected of me. I don't understand how this could be happening. And I was both proud of what this kid had accomplished and angry that the system was treating him this way. Because yes, he got 3 to 9, and because of the JO law, he was criminalized. He had gotten a felony conviction along with the 3 to 9. And so yes, even though it happened at 14, he was facing, under our immigration laws, mandatory deportation. How many of you have ever been 14? How would you like to be defined forever by what you did at 14? So I decided that I was going to join the fight for this young man. And I wrote a letter to the governor. I said, Governor, the last time I saw this young man, he was in my courtroom. He was in tears. His mother was in tears. I told him what he had to do in order to make it up to his mother, in order to redeem himself. He did everything. His employer said that he never met a man that worked as hard as he did. And here we are deporting him to China, and he doesn't even have any relatives in China. This is an outrage. This is an injustice. But I knew that so many other young men, similarly situated, didn't have a chance to get a pardon. So I had no illusions that this was going to happen. About a month after that, I'm in the civil court waiting to pick up Mary Ellen. And I get a telephone call from Nina Bernstein of the New York Times. Whoa, when a judge gets a call from a reporter, Nina Bernstein of the New York Times. I said, Nina Bernstein? She says, Judge Corriero, do you remember the case of King Hong-Woo? I said, well, yes. She said, you sentenced him to 3 to 9 years when he was a boy. I said, yes. She said, well, I'm going to write a story about this. And you wrote a letter in his defense, didn't you? I said, yes, I did. She said, good, because I'm going to tell this story, and I'm going to describe the insanity of these immigration laws that are deporting a 14-year-old boy under these circumstances. I said, oh, thank you very much. So she wrote a front-page New York Times article. It was below the fold, so I can't claim it was. Judge keeps his word to immigrant who kept his. And this article just created this incredible stir of people who became outraged by how could we as a society be dealing with a 14-year-old boy like this? This is an injustice. It cries out for something. And there was a huge internet response decrying the insanity of the immigration laws and their lack of discretion in this regard. And then 3 weeks later, I got a call from Governor Patterson, who was the governor at the time, and through him, and they decided to pardon King Hong-Woo. And today, King Hong-Woo is a citizen of the United States. But he had to get a pardon to get there. And that's the tragedy, and that was the injustice. So those of you who are in the schools of social work know the term case to cause. Case to cause. This case radicalized me a little bit, I guess, and I decided to create the New York Center for Juvenile Justice. And the New York Center for Juvenile Justice's mission was to change the infrastructure, the way we treated and judged young people in our society. And so we argued that we should be developing responses that are sensitive to the uniqueness of the young people that are coming before us, so we should have individualized sentencing. And I was asked to speak to the legislature about what my views were. And my views were simply that we should raise the age of criminal responsibility, put the vast majority of young people who were accused of crimes under 18 into the juvenile court, make sure that we didn't unduly criminalize too many young people, and make sure that they got the kind of services that were only available in the family court. So in April of 2017, Governor Cuomo enacted what has come to be called Raise the Age legislation. And what it did was it did indeed raise the age of criminal responsibility to 18. And it certified that from here on in, all 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds, and as of October 1st, this was a 2-year implementation period. First year applied to 16-year-olds, second year applied to 17-year-olds, and as of October 1st of this year, every child under 18 years of age will go to a youth part. The concept of the youth part that we created within the adult court was institutionalized. They'll go to a youth part before a specially trained judge who is empowered to act not only as an adult court judge, but also as a juvenile court judge, so that the social service orientation of the juvenile court was brought into the adult court. And the law has been in operation now for a little over a year, and I'm told, based on the data that's been available and the information I've received, that the vast majority of young people under 18 accused of felonies, including the juvenile offenders that I dealt with, are being transferred or removed to the family court and given the kind of services that they need, and are coming out of their interaction with the court without a criminal record. And this concept of youthful offender was the holy grail. Because if you were a lawyer representing a child under 18 years of age, you wanted to make sure that that child was able to recover from that mistake. So let me just give you, do you want me to talk a little bit about what else do you want me to say? Sorry,
Well,
Paul. Go ahead.
I go back to
I was going
my-
to talk about the JO law a little bit and how it came about.
Right. Well, I wanted to just, I mean, I don't know if this audience knows sort of, you know, can you give a brief historical, I don't, you can do nothing brief.
But I'll try.
The historical overview of just, you know, I guess the history of juvenile. I mean, where did we
Yes.
start in this nation
Well,
when
of
it came
course.
to juvenile? There's been, from my, you know,
Right.
my understanding of studying this, there's been sort of a few dips. There's been
Yeah.
a few arcs, a few sort of historic
Right.
moments. It feels like we're in sort of a
Yes.
historic moment of reform right now. If you want to talk about that, we can
I will.
also talk about what you think are the big challenges that this moment, we are in this real profound moment of
I'll talk about the
change.
historical context first, and then some suggestions I have to make the system work even smoother,
Okay.
as far as I'm concerned. So, of course, New York has always been considered a progressive state, and was always considered progressive with respect to its treatment of young people. And going back as far as 1824, we had what were called the houses of refuge, where if a young person was arrested or whatever, they would serve their time or go to a house of refuge where they would be healed, if you will. That was the whole philosophy behind it. In 1900, because of the work of progressives and social workers and people who were concerned about all of the young immigrant kids who were walking in the street poor and begging, and the crime that was emanating from the poorest of our neighborhoods, decided to create a separate court presided over a special judge who would be sensitive to the developmental differences of children, who would be able to develop a rapport with the young people that came before them, and so that they would act in a way that directed them, led them to programs and to services that would help them address the issues that brought them to the court in the first place. And so they created something that was unique in the world, unique in any democracy, this idea of a juvenile court. Because we here in America always looked upon our children as precious commodities, especially in a democracy where we professed the American dream, the idea that no matter who you are or where you come from, you have an equal opportunity to succeed. And it is in our children that we place our dreams, and it is our children who need to believe that. Let me give you an example of a young woman, girl who appeared before me, because now that you got me talking a little bit about the American dream and this idea, we'll call her Loretta, that's not a true name. She was a 14-year-old African-American girl riding on the subway with her girlfriend one morning. And her girlfriend was a little bigger than she was, a little tougher, who had a reputation of being a bully. And they were sitting across from another group of young women. How are you, Judge Acker? You pierced ears, Judge Acker? Good. I'll get to that. So they were sitting across the way from another group of young women, and one of them had these beautiful, what do you call them, Judge? Hoop earrings to her ears. And the bully that's with Loretta says to Loretta, look at those earrings. I like them. I want them. You have. He pierced the ears, those earrings? Yeah. So, see, the bully gets up. I'm not going to drink anymore before I come to these events. And then, and Loretta stands next to her. And the bully says, give me your earrings. Give me your earrings. The girl panics, gets up, tries to walk away, but is blocked from doing so by Loretta, who's standing next to the bully. The bully again demands the earrings. No response. The train slows down to enter our 14th Street subway station. As it does, the bully again asks for the earrings. No response. She reaches down and rips the earrings out of her ears. The train doors open up. Both Loretta and the bully run off the train. There's a police officer who happens to be there. Of course, sometimes they're not there, but this time he was there. And he saw the bully carrying the bloodied earrings, if you will, and this little girl screaming on the subway, and arrests both the bully and Loretta, charges them with the crime of robbery in the first degree, the second degree, the forcible taking of property, and in the course of it causing physical injury. Loretta is charged under the theory that she was an accomplice. See, my partner knew that. We represented many accomplices in our day. An accomplice. And under the JO law, which, by the way, still exists, she was 14 years of age. She was facing mandatory imprisonment for robbery in the second degree of a minimum of 1 to 3 years, maximum of 2 1/3 to 7, and upon conviction would incur a felony record for the rest of her life. At 14, the only way out for Loretta was for a judge to exercise his or her discretion in granting what we call youthful offender treatment, which is the legal equivalent of a second chance, which freed the judge up to give an alternative, non-incarceratory sentence of probation. But the exercise of that discretion was carefully limited and circumscribed by the presumption of incarceration that was embedded in the idea of the juvenile offender law in the first place. So you simply couldn't give youthful offender treatment because a person was 14. There had to be some reason, some rationale to sustain it, to show that you weren't acting arbitrarily. So Loretta comes before me, and a judge in arraignments, I was in the Supreme Court, so by the time her case got to me, it was about 30 days, but a judge in arraignments set a $500 bail on Loretta. Now, how many 14-year-olds do you know have $500 in their little piggy banks? No, they don't have it. The grandmothers put up the money, or aunts or guardians, but not the 14-year-old. Nevertheless, we set $500 bail on her. She couldn't get out, and her lawyer comes to me and said, Judge, she's never been in trouble before. She's going to one of our schools for the performing arts. She's a very talented dancer. She said, I don't understand it. So I told one of the program representatives who used to come to lobby me for kids, because the idea of the youth part was to focus our limited resources in the adult court in one place so that we could try to take advantage of, did I do something? Try to take advantage of the limited resources we had, and people would only have to come to one place before one judge, and there'd be some uniformity in the way in which we dealt with these young people. So I said, do me a favor, interview this little girl. So the program representative went in the back, talked to her for a few minutes, came back to me and said, Judge, said, I asked Loretta a typical social worker question to get a sense of who she was, what her relationships in the community were. Said, I asked Loretta, if you could change 3 things in your life, what would you change? She said, Judge, you know what she told me? I said, no, what did she say? She said, Loretta said she would change her country, she would change her family, and she would change her sex. Her country because she believed that America was a racist society. Her family because her mother was a crack addict and she never knew who her father was. And her sex because she felt that young women were vulnerable to physical and sexual abuse. How do you deal with Loretta? What tools did I have as a judge to deal with her, to turn on that little light bulb on her? Loretta, don't you realize around your talent, you have the power to change the circumstances of your life? How do you get it to believe that? How do you get it to believe, as Barack Obama put in his book, to have the audacity to hope? Because that's what it would have taken. It taken audacity. And that audacity is the only thing that would have prevented her from getting up and trying to impress the bully, because she said, no, wait a minute. If I do this, I can't be who I might want to be. That this would jeopardize my dream, if you will, my American dream. But she didn't have that hope. How do you tell a little girl, how do you give a little girl like that who is uncomfortable in her country, uncomfortable in her family, and uncomfortable in her skin, how do you get her to believe in the great American dream? And of course, as Carla would sit in my courtroom, we used to keep an open courtroom. We used to have students from all over come and see what we were trying to do and see who these young people are. Because when you hear, well, they're a juvenile offender, you have in your mind's eye this image of this horrible-looking person is going to leap out at you from the dark. But they're our children. They're your children. They're my children. But the unfortunate reality is the JO law fell on the backs of the poor. And the backs of the poor consisted primarily in New York City of people of color and minorities. 33% of the entire population of 16 and 17-year-olds are Hispanics or African Americans. 73% of the people arrested are Hispanics or African Americans. So this law fell on the backs of the poor at this time in our society. And so we were criminalizing many of them for behavior that was just simply a little more than being present when someone else had this idea to engage in violence. So Loretta was placed in a program, and it's a long story with Loretta. I'll tell you about it during the reception. But because otherwise Carla would get very upset with me. But in any event, I gave her a second chance. I placed her in a program. I monitored her behavior, and I ultimately gave her youthful offender treatment. Now, it doesn't always work that way. And this idea of how do we inspire young people to believe in the American dream? And why is that important? Because what is it that will deter a young person from doing something that she doesn't necessarily want to do, but is so connected to her friends that she doesn't have the gumption to walk away? Well, one more story.
Well, what happened with Loretta? Where is she now?
All right, so Loretta,
I mean,
I'll tell you what
quickly.
happened. I'll tell you what happened to Loretta. Okay, you want me to concise it? There's no such concising. When you live this long, you get all these stories and you can't help it, right, Harold? So Loretta, there's the story with Loretta. So Loretta, I let out. I released her without bail, and that was, of course, the responsibility that judges would have to take upon themselves. I let her out of jail. And an old-time judge once told me, hey, Mike, you don't get in trouble for keeping him in. You only get in trouble when you let him out. But I let her out. And she went into this program, and she was doing very well for about 6 or 7 months. And when I put somebody in a program, I didn't just put them in a program and forget about them. If I put you in a program, I'm going to check up on you every week. Every 3 or 4 weeks, you're coming back into my courtroom. How you doing? Going to school every day, keeping a curfew, doing what you're supposed to do. And if you're not doing what you're supposed to do, I know what you're doing because I'm checking up on you every week. And I'm not going to wait necessarily for the 3-week adjourn date. I'm going to bring you back in if you're not keeping your curfew, because I don't want you to be in a position where I have no recourse but to remand you. So Loretta was doing very well up until one appearance, and her representative said, Judge, you know, she's not been keeping her curfew as well as she should. I said, is that right? I said, why is that, Loretta? He says, well, you know, I met this fellow and we've been dating. I said, well, there's nothing wrong with that. That's okay. That's natural. So the program representative, yes, Judge, but he's much older than she is. I said, is that right? He said, yes, he is older than I, but he's got a job. He's working at the post office. I said, bring him here next time. The biggest, as I said it, I wanted to bite my tongue. I knew it was never going to happen. She never came back after 8 weeks. So, now Loretta was 14. About 7 years later, I'm sitting in the youth park. It was about as big as this. And in the back, I see this young woman, very attractive, in the back. And she waits until we finish the day, and she said, do you remember me? I said, Loretta. She says, yes. And she came down, and I said, what happened? Why did she come back? She said, Judge, I'm sorry. I was really frightened, you know, and I didn't know what to do. And I moved with this fellow, and we lived together. I went to school. She said, I want you to know I went to school. I went to high school. I finished high school, and I finished college. And I have a job now as an administrative assistant in a university. It is in Hunter. So I said, well, that's terrific. Oh, she said, I'm also working part-time. I said, that's even better. So, because she was a very talented dancer. So I said, all right, now, look, you go to probation, and because I haven't sentenced her yet. Because a warrant, she was speeding, and the warrant fell on her. So I said, you go to probation and then come back up here. So she goes to probation. I got a call from the probation officer. Judge, she says, you sent this young woman down there? I said, yeah. He said, you know where she's working? I said, no, I know. She's making a living. You know where she's working? I said, no. She says, she's working at the Naked Essence. So I said, well, she has a job. And we'll work on the curfew. But then she worked through all of that, but she ultimately succeeded. That's the story with her.
Well, I do want to, this isn't in my notes or questions I thought about answering, but having sat in on your court and seeing the interactions that you had with the young people, what I always witnessed was a certain, for lack of any other phrase, humanity that took place in the courtroom. The way that you would speak to kids, want to hear their voices, insist that handcuffs were taken off, even if the appearance was only long enough for the court to be told that their attorney couldn't be there that day, and the case had to be put over for a week. And I guess one of my questions is now you started the first Manhattan Youth Part, and then there was one in Brooklyn with a different judge, one in the Bronx and one in Queens, I believe, some version of this. And now with this Raise the Age legislation now there's going to be a whole bunch of youth parts. And one of my, I love that that's happening, but one of my concerns, one of my apprehensions, and I know one of the critiques that sometimes you got was like, well, it's because you are you. Right, because you're a charismatic judge that cares in a unique way, and once you leave, this kind of goes away. And I think about all those youth part judges now. How do we? I don't know if I guess my concern, my apprehension is there that same sort of attention? Is there that same sort of attention to young people's youthfulness? Have the judges that are overseeing these courts been trained to understand adolescent brain development and and know the kinds of things that these young people need. I mean, I'll just interject quickly. The first time I sat in on Judge Corriero's court, I remember you said something to me. We were talking, you pulled me in the back, or we were in chambers or something. And I'll never forget this. You said the majority of these kids were victims before they were perpetrators. And that kind of attention to just the complexity of these young people's lives, and what and how and why they had made these kinds of errors in their lives. I'm just sort of curious of how you feel about how do we take that attention and that level of understanding that you had, how do we make sure that that is present with this new moment where we have all these youth parts? Is it possible?
I think it's possible. I'm very flattered that you think of me that way. But I mean, I just look out right in front of me, and I see Judge DeMango, who I know has that same sense of. Judge DeMango appeared before me when she was a young prosecutor. So.
Exactly.
So I like to think I corrupted her enough that she's picked up on some of my approaches to dealing with young people. But no, I understand what you mean. It's very important that, I sat on Mayor Bloomberg's Judiciary Committee, and it's very important that we choose our judges wisely. You can have the best sounding legislation in the world, but if you don't have the right judge implementing it, then it's meaningless. It's your responsibility, the community's responsibility, to demand that the judges that are going to be meting out sentences are of the finest and highest caliber. And you cannot tolerate anything less. I was fortunate. In my own life, you asked me, where does that humanity come from? I consider myself to be very fortunate. I grew up in a 5-story tenement, right across the street from the tombs, 3 small rooms. There's a 5-story walk-up. Unlike this beautiful edifice, didn't have an elevator. My father did the work of a longshoreman. My mother was a seamstress. Neither of them graduated school. They were not formally educated, but they saw the power of education, and they recognized it, and as soon as they could, they sent me to the Maryknoll Missionaries in Chinatown. And that was, the kickoff for me, this idea of education, realizing that education was a magic sword that could cut through inequality and prejudice and poverty. And I tried to instill in every one of these young people this power of education. And in a democracy, it is knowledge that's power. And it's not might that makes right. And they have to believe that. And we adults have to ensure that the people who are judging them, the people who are teaching them, are of the highest caliber. Now, I've traveled all across the state before the Raise the Age legislation went into effect to speak to the judges and share with them my approach to dealing with young people. Some people embrace it, some people don't. But I think there are enough good people in the legal profession, and enough people who have recognized that, as I did, that in one generation, we went from that poor tenement household to a judge. That's the American dream. That's what America means. That's what progress and understanding is in a city like New York. You could go from a tenement, the son and grandson of immigrants, to a judge, and be sitting here in Eleanor Roosevelt and Franklin Delano Roosevelt's home. How did I get here? No, we've been blessed. And so I believe that. That's what inspires me, and that's the kind of inspiration that I try to share with it, because there's nothing like seeing a young boy come back into your courtroom and say, proud to show you his report card. To see a little girl walking in, neatly dressed in a suit, and proud to tell you that she got her first job. To see a parent saying, Judge, my child has changed because of their coming to your courtroom. There's no greater reward for a judge who wants to work with young people. Now, my niece is a teacher, and I'm always amazed that probably the last thing that they ask you when you're a teacher is, do you like kids? If you want to work with kids, you better like them. You better understand them. You better never forget what it was like to be 14, 15, or 16. And I've been blessed. I've been blessed to realize that in my own life I made some very careless choices, but I was able to recover from them, and I had the support of people who eventually recognized that I could do a lot more than what I was doing at 15. If you had seen me at 15 years of age, standing on the corner of Mulberry and Hester Street in Little Italy, with a Lucky Strike cigarette hanging on the side. Oh, I miss those Lucky Strikes. And a long collar shirt, you know, like the wise guys, the gangsters would wear. This kid is never going to grow up to be a judge. He's going to be before a judge. But it didn't happen that way. Great movie. My last story.
Well, I've
Did I answer your
been
question?
told we have to go to Q&A.
We have to go. Q&A. I'll go to Q&A. You're very familiar. You're Professor Michael. Yes. Yes, Michael. I know you.
I'm on TV a lot, but not
Yes,
not
so
as
am I,
often-
Michael.
Not as often as
So
not
am
as
I.
often as you and the other two judges who are my favorites.
Yes.
That's why I came. I want to see if you really were the person on TV, and you are. I'm waiting for.
Thank you, Michael.
I'm waiting for Judge Domingo and Judge Tanya to answer you
Ah,
and to outvote you. Well, let me ask you this question.
Yes.
Excellent presentation, by the way.
Thank you, Michael.
I'm sympathetic with the youthful treatment, offender treatment of years ago, where young people were taken out of the criminal justice system and not sent to Rikers Island and other places, but had a second chance. I'm sympathetic. But I also know that there were a lot of thugs who were young, who were criminals, and they were really going against the black community, Hispanic communities in which they lived. They're hurting their mothers and their fathers and their sisters and their brothers and their cousins with violence, and who didn't deserve a second chance. They needed to go to prison. So I wanted to have your thoughts about the other side, as sympathetic as I was when I was young,
Okay.
as to your position. There are
That's a
predators
very
out
good
there-
question,
There
Michael.
are predators out there
It's
who
an-
need to go to prison.
It's an important question. It's an important question. I don't have all the answers. We don't have all the answers about violence and how young people so easily engage in violence. Like the bully who was with Loretta, who was willing to rip the earrings out of this little girl's ear to get what she wanted. The idea that, the dilemma that I faced in my courtrooms, how do you persuade children that they can achieve their goals without violence when they're living in a violent world? How do you explain to a 14-year-old boy that he can get respect without violence? And that's a tough question that not only the courts are responsible for, but for their families and the communities and the neighborhoods from which they come. So, all I have been advocating for is a system that helps us to more precisely identify those young people that are dangerous. The problem with the system was that it swept up in its broad sweep so many people like Loretta, who had never been in trouble, so many people like King Hong Woo, who could recover from his mistakes, and we didn't have a way of analyzing the situation in a way where when we identified someone here, I'll give you a classic example. I had a young boy who was found in a dumpster at birth, had lived in 16 successive foster care homes, was before me for a violent robbery. He was 15 years of age. He had been in trouble before. He was a violent young boy, and I sentenced him to the maximum I could under the law, which was 3 1/3 to 10 years. But I said at the time of sentence, this young boy needs help. It's not enough to send them away to Rikers or wherever. He needs help there because all of the kids that I sentenced were coming back essentially before they were 21 years of age, even if I gave them the maximum, if you did the math with. So I said he needs help. He needs the resources to deal with this. He needs psychiatric care. And of course, he didn't get it. And oh, by the way, his lawyer, I was sentencing him to the maximum, and I'm looking at this boy, and he had dreadlocks. And his lawyer said, Judge, you know, the most important thing to this kid is his dreadlocks. And I said, look, I'm taking away his youth. I'm giving him 3 1/3 to 10 to maximum. Let him keep his dreadlocks. Give me an order, and I'll sign it off that it's a religious thing if that's what you want me to do. So he gets out after serving the maximum, and he's arrested for beheading the superintendent of a building that he's living in order to live in his apartment, to get an apartment. And the head of the superintendent was found in the refrigerator. It wasn't until 4 or 5 months later. Horrible crime. Press Judge Corriero lenient. He let him keep his dreads. That's the only. They didn't say, I said he needed psychiatric care and you didn't give it to him. And when I read the probation report, the initial probation, he said, all I ever wanted in life was a home of my own. And then he had killed for it. So what I'm saying to you is, yes, there are young people who, the damage, Carla said it best, they have been victims before they become victimized, but it makes them no less dangerous. The estimates are that between 50 and 70% of the young people who wind up getting arrested, or that I saw, I've been told, 50 to 70% have mental health issues. And they cannot go unaddressed. And so I can sentence anybody 10 years in jail, but make sure they get the kind of intervention or treatment that protects society. So it's not enough to go and say, well, I want you to lock this guy up for 20 years. Okay, I'll lock him up for 20 years, but is that person coming out better or worse after the 20 years? And how safe are we now from that person, unless we develop the kind of interventions that are going to be able to undo the damage that was done to them. So I've sentenced 13-year-olds and 14-year-olds to life imprisonment for murder. So I understand what you're saying. And certainly, for me, it was a very difficult thing to do, but I felt that there was no other option given what I saw in the histories and the backgrounds of young people. I'm sorry. Yes, questions?
Sorry, wait for the mic, please. Thanks.
There are perhaps 2 questions, but I'll try to be brief. You may.
You can never be brief.
Well,
You're like me.
I'm going to try. I'm going to try. One of the questions I have is related to your notion of second opportunity, second chance. And though I've chatted with you on other occasions, I'm not clear, and we've never really discussed it, but I don't know, maybe since you're being very loquacious, you can talk about it now. Where does that come from? Is it a...
Second chances?
Wait, yes, but I want some elaboration and some detail. The second question has to do with what you recently just said about the resources necessary for psychiatric or psychological care, because it's not necessarily a medical problem.
Right, precisely.
So, and the resources are obviously significantly limited. They have been, they are, and there's no indication that would shift in any dramatic way. So maybe.
So you want to get you want to know
an answer to the first
yeah,
question.
I'm going to answer the first question. Yeah. Where does my sense of redemption come from? Why do I feel redemption is important? Ask Eleanor Roosevelt.
I have some.
You already quoted what she said about that.
But obviously it's a significant part of your sensibility.
For me?
Yeah.
Yes, because in a way, I've given myself second chances. Right. In a way, I've realized that I've made a lot of mistakes, and I've recovered from them. I like to think I've recovered from them. As a matter of fact, when I say, how would you like to be judged by something you did at 14? I don't want to be judged by anything I did before I was 40. I take responsibility after 40, but no, up until 40, I was a demon. No, don't you believe in redemption? Isn't that what Yom Kippur is about?
I'm not sure.
Because you sent that text to me.
Yeah, well, I don't always read
Well, the
everything.
judgment. But you
I don't
like the
always read everything
judgment.
I send.
All right, now your second question about, yes, we need, do you know that I sentenced a young boy for molesting, sodomizing another boy in the hallway of his building. The boy that I sentenced was 14 years of age, and the young boy that he sodomized was 11. And we sentenced him to 2 to 6 years. And at the time I sentenced him, I made it perfectly clear on the record, this kid needs help. And he needs to have the appropriate psychological or psychiatric intervention. And when you sentence the JO to an indeterminate term, if they turn 16, the institution could come and ask me to send them to an adult prison because they were incorrigible. So I got an application to send this boy to an adult institution. And he had been in the institution that he was acting out in for about 1.5 years. And I said, wait a minute. So you want me to move him to an adult institution? I said, what kind of care have you been giving him pursuant to my direction? Are you giving him psychiatric care? Are you giving him psychology? He said, yes, we are. I said, well, what kind? Group therapy. I said, group therapy? You want this 14-year-old boy to sit up amongst his peers and tell them how he sodomized an 11-year-old boy? Is that your prescription for the intervention that I asked for? He said, well, we don't have a full-time psychiatrist on staff. I said, well, get one. And I denied their application. But that's the problem we have. Now, raise the age legislation. We have raised the age, but now we have to do certain things. We have to reinvest. It's not enough simply to raise the age and say, oh, we're going to leave it at that. We have to reinvest in the juvenile court. We have to reinvest in the institutions that are capable of providing that kind of intervention. And unless we do that, then it doesn't matter how high and mighty the laws are, we'll never succeed in keeping society safe and giving these young people an opportunity to become constructive members of society.
I'm glad you brought up Yom Kippur, of all people, because one of the prayers ends with the idea that repentance, prayer, and charity cancel any stern decree that has been handed down. So this is a perfect day after to have you, Judge. And Carla and Judge Corriero, thank you for bringing light. Please join us upstairs for the reception where we can continue the conversation.